About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I want to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. After looking into the matter a little more, I have a lot more details I think will paint a clear picture, so just bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between crickets, tree frogs, and cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog would not go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me. I'm her whole world. But on this night, as I held the door open, she looked out, then looked at me and was like, "Nope." So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep outside. It was dead silent. I still shrugged this off, walked down my front steps, and headed to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt as if something was watching me. I looked around, but saw nothing. After I reached for my car to grab what I had forgotten earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving toward me. I took a step back and checked all around me. Then, all of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges rattle that lined our walkway. At first, I thought it was a rabbit I had spooked or something, as I had just seen one earlier in the day, right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a nearby shrub. I drew my gun and called out, "Whoever that was, you're about to be shocked." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think maybe this was some local teenagers just messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back towards my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound, like a huge dog. What made me really run back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my front porch, drew my gun once again, expecting it to be right behind me, but there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on our bench with my wife. She got up and walked around to get something inside, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that same panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I ran back into the house. At this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was really rainy and stormy. My wife and I enjoyed listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing it was. I grew up in Oregon, so I really love the rain, and for the past 10 years, we've lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in one day and then be bone dry for the rest of the year. My wife grew up in Nevada, so rain was again a rare thing. She loved going outside and just watching it, so for both of us, it was an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn as we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing. My wife stopped me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said no, and asked what she heard. She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling out for help in the woods." I said I didn't hear anything. After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I don't hear anything, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It sounds like our son." I think he's out there and got lost. I told her no. He's in the house sleeping on the couch. We both got up and looked through the blinds that were open right behind us and could see all of our children lying there. So weird. I swore it sounded like our son, but it wasn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything. She stood up and said, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him now." At this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught walking into them during the daylight, much less at night during the storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening the whole time. There's absolutely nobody out there calling for help. You need to stay here." Getting worried about her, she was acting completely out of character. Not to mention, she was 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then said, "Well, what if there's some child out there lost in the woods? First off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house, which is completely lit up like a Christmas tree, are slim." She then said, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stood up and started walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again, saying, "No, get in the house. I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to go inside." She finally complied, and we both went inside. I don't know what that was, but I was completely freaked out. A few months passed after that event. It was getting dark outside, and I heard the front door to our house open up, so I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So, to hear the sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she normally doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked up front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I told her, "Seriously, you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate that?" She then looked out into the woods and said, "See, there it is again." I couldn't hear anything, but what I did notice was that the silence was back. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside of our house are slim to none, and you need to get back in the house. At this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist. She thankfully did. Looking back, I really feel bad knowing what I know now. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out on the front porch again. It was early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn. Our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. He knows he's not allowed to be outside of a certain area that we mapped off, but he loves playing outside. The road is about 50 feet from our front porch, so we have to be as careful as we can. As we were talking, we kept an eye on him. The neighbor drove by and stopped to say hi for a second. This interaction only took about 8 seconds. All they said was, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later if his wife got something for the kids. We said, "Okay, great," and then he drove off. I looked over where our son had been, and he was gone. I called out to him, called out his name, and I could hear his car on our side drive. I then scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish, and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said, "You've got 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else." He adamantly pointed in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods, just assuming he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and maybe wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him walk off into the woods. I just wrote this off as him being a curious little 3-year-old. This instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done something similar, but nothing quite as extreme. There have been nights where I just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang outside on the house behind the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, and it has a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked out to investigate. Dead silence again. The floodlight on the side of our house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. Nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of someone watching me was back. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that 3 of my dogs in the area weren't making a peep. Our dogs have no filter. They'll bark at anyone and everyone, including me. So to see all of them hiding with their tails between their legs and not making a peep really worried me. I kept walking, and all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs and everything else started making sounds again, as if someone had just flipped a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I didn't see anything. She shrugged and just said, "As long as our dogs are okay." Due to those circumstances, that night I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 of our exterior walls. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time I find nothing going on outside, there have also been times when my wife and I will just be sitting and watching a movie or something. My wife will walk over and ask, "Did you call me?" I would respond and tell her no. She keeps claiming and swearing she heard me call her name in her ear, saying that it was definitely my voice, but didn't understand because it sounded so close while I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground. It's like a balcony with no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she said she heard someone whisper in her ear, but couldn't make out the sound. I just chalked it up to thinking she was going crazy, but you'll see I think all of this ties into the final moment where things are all revealed. The last thing I want to mention, before we get into what just happened, is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road, kind of on a downslope, but perfect for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have the woods surrounding you on all sides, except for back up to my shop. I have to say, it always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, Around 5 in the evening, I was sighting a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but starting to fade, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around, but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you've been in Tennessee woods, you know that there are a lot of branches that fall off trees randomly out of nowhere. So this is nothing new, except this time it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but didn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I quickly turned, but again, nothing. As I started to walk back again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is it was all around me. I turned around to face the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes freaked me out, so running was not a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, and nothing happened. I quickly grabbed it, sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag, grabbed my rifle bag, and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this because I didn't want to freak her out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece was staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over her summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store, about a mile from our house, when I saw two eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the other side of the road just ahead of us. It caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I said out loud, "What is that?" they squinted and vanished. I made the comment that it was almost as if they knew I could see them and moved. The color itself was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerisms of a large cat. They felt very ominous. It's tough to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing more. A few moments later, we arrived back at our house. As we were getting the bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. While I was waiting to help carry in the bags, I heard my dog start growling. I looked in the direction she was looking, my neighbor's property across the street. What I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I had always been skeptical, as I had never actually seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. My street is kind of spread out like a neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of the road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees. The movement itself caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking but moving faster than any normal person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was almost like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. What the hell is that? I realized it was now looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open and was moving as quickly as it could, all while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was definitely stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now. I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR with the short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car. Knowing I had just told her firmly to get into the house, her blatant disregard for my command annoyed me. I still watched over her without saying a word. She was slowly walking, then turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted. She ran up the steps in a panic state. Later on, I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said she heard something big in the woods, walking loudly on the leaves, and when she turned toward it, she heard a deep, guttural growl. I asked her why she didn't come when I told her to, and she said she thought I was just talking to my son. I then told her what I had seen, and now she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could actually see something. I told her it was not a good idea, but she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and at least take a flashlight. At this point, she was maybe 6 feet away from our SUV. She turned and started walking back to me, and I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV, back across the street, into the woods. My porch is raised up, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. Whatever this was cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car, out of my line of sight, and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings, grabbed the flashlight, and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something, and I asked her what she saw. She quickly turned and ran back up the porch with a terrified look, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was like a figure hiding inside a tree and that she saw some eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. She described the pupils as gray, like eyes do when they go blind, and said it was really dark gray and almost like a cloud. I told her to get inside and went and locked the door. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height around 9 feet tall, with its eyes about 6 inches apart. I have no idea what this thing was. After doing a little bit of research, I think it might be a glimmerman or a crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but found nothing. More importantly, it appeared to phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. I originally posted this in R Bigfoot, but after further research, I believe it belongs here. One of the things that fits is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Additionally, it has a playback-like communication. When I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs. My wife heard our son crying for help as he had recently fallen and cried for help. And the baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to just recently. This thing must have heard me call my wife's name, and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice to her. Another thing my niece said that night was she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said it felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and kept wanting her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there's a property that is barbed wired off and has a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down that road is underdeveloped land, and one of the trees there has a large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who'd entered his property, and then teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything. It's just pure forest, as far as the eye can see. One of the things this entity is said to do is to make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there's more than one of these things out there, this really does make the missing 411 stuff make a whole lot more sense. I'm completely perplexed and scared of what I can do. Any advice would be appreciated. Try and keep this post alive with any new experiences.